It was early, and I was pedaling along a picturesque country road on my favorite red bike, which my father had given me for my 13th birthday. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, but I didn't feel hot. A cool breeze pleasantly caressed my face, gently playing with my long, wavy hair. I felt lighter and more carefree than ever, with all the paths open before me. I stopped by the side of the road, leaned my bike against a tree and took a blanket, a packet of sandwiches, and a thermos of cocoa out of the basket. Settling down on the grass, I began to eagerly devour my breakfast. Suddenly, the remaining packet of sandwiches began to move, emitting a terrible rattling sound. Horrified, I covered my ears with my hands and woke up. The old alarm clock was ringing and dawn was just breaking. I sighed as I switched off the alarm and forced myself out of bed. If I didn't get up now, it would be even harder later, I reminded myself mentally, getting out of bed and groping for my old worn-out slippers. I went into the bathroom yawning. I washed my face with cold water to wake up fully and looked in the mirror. I was no longer the carefree 13-year-old girl of my dreams. The dark circles under my eyes reminded me of chronic sleep deprivation, and the wrinkles around my eyes reminded me that I would be 34 in a month. Again, I don't have time to wash my hair, I thought sadly. I'll have to use hairpins and hairspray. I quickly got ready and went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast for the children. Let them sleep a little longer, I thought, glancing quickly at the clock. Although raising children on my own was difficult, I did my best to prolong their carefree childhood. I got married early. I couldn't wait to leave my parents' house. It wasn't that I had an unhappy childhood or that my parents treated me badly. It's just that all my older sisters did it and I didn't want to be left behind. In the end, I chose the best-looking guy in town and convinced him to move to the mainland right after the wedding. My husband didn't want to leave his hometown, but I insisted. I've always been stubborn and independent, just like my father. I had 3 children with my beloved husband, and then something went wrong in our marriage. As if an invisible chain that bound us together had lost one of its links. My husband started staying late at work, while I stayed at home with the children. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer, and demanded that he hire a nanny so that I could leave the house too. He agreed, and I got a job in an art gallery. There were exhibitions and other events frequently, which meant I had to be in public all the time. I dressed beautifully, which my husband didn't like at all, as he was used to me always waiting for him at home. He started to get jealous, even for no reason. In the end, I couldn't take it any longer, gathered up the children, and left. I had to quit my job at the gallery because the salary wasn't very high and it was impossible to live on the alimony my ex-husband paid. I got a job as a waitress in a very good restaurant, and, at night, while the children were asleep, I worked as a bartender in a nightclub. My elderly parents had been inviting me back to the island where I grew up for a long time, but I was too proud to accept their invitation. Besides, I didn't feel like going back to the small town where only old people and single mothers like me lived. I'd rather work myself to exhaustion than die of boredom, I thought to myself, finishing my breakfast. The clock was almost 7:30. It was time to wake up the children. I don't know how it would all have ended if someone from work hadn't called me on my only day off. Normally, I'd hang up the phone, knowing I'd get no peace. But this time, I'd arranged a week ago to meet my childhood friend Ramona to take the children to the amusement park, and now I was waiting for her call. When the manager's number appeared on the display, I hesitated for a moment, but eventually put the phone to my ear and answered. "Darling, we really need your help," Mario said quickly, as if afraid that I would change my mind and hang up. "What happened?" I asked tiredly. "Carita's taken ill. We need someone to cover her shift. I'll pay double the fare," Mario sighed. Of course, I had promised the children to take them to the park and had already arranged it with Ramona. But the increase in pay would be very useful for us now. The rent on the apartment was about to expire. I decided that Ramona, being a mother of many like me, would manage easily. "I'll go, but only for 3 to 4 hours," I replied quickly and confidently. "You're getting paid for the whole shift," Mario grumbled into the phone, but didn't dare refuse. Nobody but me would agree to work on their day off. Half an hour later, I was putting on my restaurant-branded apron and securing my unruly, wavy hair with a scarf, as I'd managed to wash it today. "You look beautiful." Mario winked as he walked past. I thought sarcastically, I could look even better if it weren't for work. Sighing, I began to place the napkin holders on the tables. At this time, there were hardly any visitors, and while doing my usual task, I distractedly looked out at the street through the large panoramic windows. I didn't immediately notice the large car of an unusual crimson hue, although it instantly drew the attention of all the passers-by and restaurant staff. "Looks like the king himself has decided to have lunch with us," someone joked. This comment roused me from my reverie, and I looked with interest at the magnificent car. I had been to the capital many times when I was married and had seen all kinds of expensive cars, but in our relatively small town, no one drove such cars. Who could have decided to visit us? A tall, dignified man in an obviously expensive dark suit stepped out of the bright red car. His black hair was smoothly combed back and his eyes were hidden by fashionable sunglasses. He walked around the car and picked up a small leather briefcase from the seat next to him. "Wow, what a businessman," exclaimed one of the waiters. "He's yours," Mario quickly decided. No one, including me, was surprised by his words. I had been working there for a long time and was the most experienced of the staff. Everyone was used to me serving the most distinguished visitors. When the man entered, I greeted him politely and escorted him to a free table by the window. He thanked me, looking intensely at my face, which made me a little uncomfortable. "Here's the menu," he said, placing a heavy, dark brown folder on the table. "I'll be back to take your order when it's ready," I added, nodding slightly and walking away. The man took off his glasses and watched me for a while before starting to flick through the menu. I went into the kitchen, took off my apron, and went into the bathroom to look at myself in the mirror. My reflection was completely ordinary, the light makeup still somewhat disguising the fatigue on my face. "Strange," I muttered aloud. Why was he looking at me like that? I tidied my hair absent-mindedly and returned to the salon. I put my apron back on and watched the man who was ready to order. "What can I get you?" I asked gently, pulling a notepad and pencil out of my apron pocket. Once again, he gave me a long, scrutinizing look, making me feel a little uncomfortable. "Sorry," said the man unexpectedly. His voice was surprisingly high for his stature. "You don't have a badge." "May I ask your name?" "Francisca," I replied. "Francisca," murmured the man softly, nodding to himself, then turned his attention back to the menu. "Please bring me the seafood pasta and a raspberry lemonade." I went to the kitchen, passed on the order to the chef, and returned to the lounge, where I stood next to the bartender, a tall, bald man who was already preparing the lemonade. I still couldn't shake off the strange feeling caused by the rich visitor's intense gaze. Why did he ask my name, I thought. It doesn't seem to be mere curiosity. While the bartender was adding mint to the lemonade, I cleaned the utensils and looked at the visitor again. He was sitting with his shoulders slumped, staring into the void, as if remembering something. When he saw me, he smiled faintly and went back to his thoughts. A few minutes later, I was called from the kitchen. I took the prepared pasta and, with the lemonade from the counter, went to the table where the man was sitting. I placed the steaming plate of pasta and the glass of lemonade on the table. As I was about to leave, the visitor called me by name. "Francisca, I'm sorry for my audacity, but can I ask you a personal question?" the man murmured, and I sensed his discomfort. "Yes, of course," I replied, curious as to why a wealthy businessman would need to speak to a simple waitress. He gestured for me to sit down. I looked around. It was forbidden to talk to customers, let alone sit at their table. However, the situation was unusual. I understood that this man wasn't trying to flirt with me, so I cautiously sat down on the edge of the chair opposite him. The man looked me in the eye again and then asked, "Francisca, may I ask where you spent your childhood?" What a strange question. I expected anything but that. "On one of the islands to the southeast of the mainland," I replied, unable to contain my curiosity. "But why do you ask?" The businessman smiled faintly in response and nervously adjusted his perfectly fitting tie. "Well, I grew up there too. Don't you recognize me, Francisca?" I was so surprised that I couldn't answer immediately. For several minutes, my mouth hung open, staring skeptically at the rich visitor. Was he joking with me? I was absolutely certain that I had never seen him before. None of my childhood friends could have come this far. "I don't remember you," I murmured softly. The man realized he was being watched. "This isn't the best place for a conversation," he whispered quickly. "Here's my card. Call me when you're free." With those words, he pulled a black cardboard rectangle with gold lettering out of his breast pocket and placed it on the table next to me. I nodded, took the card, and put it in my apron pocket. I got up from the table and returned to the bar. The bartender raised his eyebrows in surprise, then winked playfully, but I just shrugged. "He was asking if he could rent the hall for a banquet," I explained calmly. "The guy like him could buy our restaurant with everything, let alone rent a hall," he grumbled, pulling a clean napkin out of the drawer. "If I were him, I'd choose something more decent." "Yeah, but you're not him?" I laughed happily, and the bartender laughed with me. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with the visitor. I touched the business card in my pocket, wanting to make sure it wasn't all my imagination. I wouldn't have been surprised by hallucinations, since I'd had very little sleep and had worked tirelessly for a long time without a break. The card was there. I really wanted to pull it out of my pocket to read the man's name, but I didn't have the courage. "I'll wait until he leaves," I thought to myself. Finally, the man finished his meal and asked for the bill. After paying, he picked up his briefcase, waved at me, and left the room. Moments later, his car left the parking lot and disappeared around the corner. I picked up the tray and approached the table where the stranger had been. I started collecting the plates and found a note under an empty glass, along with a wad of cash. "Waiting for a call" was written on a simple piece of paper. I looked at the money. It was a good wad. I quickly looked around and, seeing that no one was watching me, put the notes in my apron pocket where the business card was already. Then, with my usual movements, I collected the plates from the tray and headed for the kitchen. "What a strange day," said Mario as he passed me. "Tell me about it," I agreed. "I'm off," the manager exclaimed. "It's time to pick up the kids from the playground." "See you later," I replied, and went to change in the staff room. Alone, I pulled the wad of notes out of my pocket and started counting. I almost fainted when I saw that the manager had left $1,000 in tips. It was unheard of. "Who are you?" I mumbled, pulling my business card out of my pocket. "Bonito Morales," read the gold lettering. Incredulous, I sat down in a chair against the wall, without taking my eyes off the business card. "That can't be," I exclaimed aloud. I closed my eyes and the memories took me back many years. When I turned 13, my father gave me a brand new red bicycle. No one else in the small town, nestled on the rocky coast, had a bike like that. With the sea on one side and a dormant volcano on the other, that was Yam's world. Our town was the only settlement on the island. There used to be people living under the volcano, but now there were only half-destroyed buildings covered in volcanic dust. The other children and I would sometimes go there on our bikes to excavate, as we called it. We would climb the abandoned buildings, explore long deserted houses in search of forgotten or lost items. Any treasure found went straight into our pockets. Of all the buildings left after the volcano erupted, we avoided exploring just one, the old, half-destroyed bell tower. Among the children, there was a legend that the ghost of a monk still lived there, one who lived in a nearby hut. One of the older boys swore that once, at exactly midnight, he heard the bells ring. But it was highly unlikely. None of the children dared spend the night in the deserted town. When I first appeared on the street with my red bicycle, I caused a sensation. I sat on the leather seat like a queen, and the children surrounded me, examining the novelty and exclaiming with admiration, "Are we going to the volcano?" I asked excitedly once the excitement had died down a little. "Hold on," said Ro, the oldest of the boys. "We've got something else to do here." Impatiently, I shrugged. "What could there possibly be to do here?" I asked in a disgruntled tone. "Boredom." Ro smiled, showing a row of jagged teeth. "Men's business. We need to teach someone a lesson." I arched my eyebrows in surprise. "You mean Morales?" Ro clenched his fists and nodded. "He needs to learn his lesson," he muttered. No one was unaware of the notorious incident. 12-year-old Benito Morales, an introvert and botany enthusiast, had hit the toughest guy in the school over the head with a book. Ro couldn't let such an act go unpunished. "Come on, Ro, that's ridiculous. He hit him with a book. He's not capable of anything else. Forget it and let's go." "I want to test my bike. It has gears," I replied. But Ro stood his ground. "No, I said Bonito will be punished. Nobody dares raise a hand against me. You provoked him, I retorted. I'd seen the boys tease little Bonito several times. He couldn't boast of strength or a sharp tone. He was very quiet and usually stayed in a corner with a book. Once, passing Bonito in the cafeteria, I saw that he was reading a book about insects and carefully examining the structure of a bee. At the time, I shrugged. Things like that never interested me. Another time, my friend Camila and I saw Bonito collecting butterfly wings on the way to school. He had a matchbox in his hands where he kept his treasures. Then Ro and his friends approached him, and I watched as he snatched the box from Bonito's hands and smashed it with his huge boot while Bonito stood to the side with his head down. You shouldn't be so passive, Camilla scolded him, in love with Ro. But I was thinking about something else. My older sister was getting married, and today I was supposed to go with her to choose her wedding dress. I knew that after the wedding, the newlyweds went to the mainland, and I dreamed that one day I would do the same. Life on the island seemed unbearably slow to me. Grow up and get married soon, I thought. At the time, I believed that marriage was the only way to leave the monotonous city behind. It never occurred to me that I could go to university and study elsewhere, but at least he never complains. Camilla added thoughtfully, bringing me back to reality. You're talking about Bonito, I realized. Yes, you're right. Even I would have told my father everything if I were him. My father loved my soul and always wanted the best for me. He forbade me to wear my sister's used clothes, and every few months, he would travel to the continent to buy something new for his little girl. That's how I got the best bike in the world, the envy of all children, and now I couldn't wait to ride it. Hang on, I've got a plan, Ro said, leaning over to whisper in my ear. I didn't like what I heard, but I didn't take his words seriously. Besides, at that moment, I couldn't think of anything but my bike, so I quickly got on the seat and rode off down the street. Come on, slowpokes, I shouted, looking back and laughing out loud. The wind ruffled my hair as I flew down the street like a hurricane. The boys could barely keep up with me. The day promised to be warm and sunny without a cloud in the sky. I stopped abruptly in front of Benito Morales' house. The boys, panting, stopped beside me. Benito's house was very small and rather poor, with old clothes hanging on the clothesline and neglected roses wilting in the vases. Hey, Benito, get out! Ro shouted. Are you coming with us on an expedition? I shouted. I knew Benito had an old bicycle inherited from his father, but I doubted he would agree to such an adventure. I'd never seen him in the abandoned town near the volcano. He's a real caretaker, I thought condescendingly of Benito. The door creaked open, and a slender figure appeared in the doorway. Benito, as always, wore glasses, but for the first time I saw him without his school uniform. He was wearing beige pants and a loose white shirt. Why are you calling me? Benito asked, his voice shaking, but that didn't mean he was nervous. As far as I could remember, Morales always spoke in a high, squeaky voice. Why not? Ro smiled. Benito adjusted his glasses, clearly trying to understand what was behind the unexpected invitation. We're not friends, you know, the boy argued. But we could be, Ro replied. Really? Benito was surprised. I was starting to get annoyed with this pointless conversation. I wanted to walk, fly, run at full speed. I crossed my arms over my chest, showing with all my posture that it was time to end it. Of course, Ro continued. Her voice sounded excessively sweet, and I even shuddered at the blatant insincerity. But yesterday you hit me, and I realized that you're brave and audacious. So now I offer my friendship. Will you come with us? Ro smiled at the confused Morales with the friendliest smile he could manage. Benito adjusted his glasses again and messed up his hair. It was clear that he was completely confused and didn't know what to think. My bike is pretty old, the boy finally said. If you want, we can take my older brother's bike, Ro replied. He'll be happy to lend it to you. Benito hadn't expected that. He had never been invited to anything before and wasn't used to so much attention. He didn't even mind his brother's bike. What a snake, I thought, feeling my patience running out. Let's go or we'll leave, I exclaimed impatiently. Bonito looked at me from Ro and, unexpectedly, nodded. Okay, I'll just tell my mom, he said quickly, and disappeared behind the door. Ro laughed. Hey, did you hear that? He's going to tell his mom. How cute. The other boys laughed too. I just stayed silent, biting my lip. Firstly, I didn't expect Benito to agree. Secondly, I couldn't bear to be in the city any longer. The road to the volcano always captivated me, making me feel the long-awaited freedom. At that time, it felt like all roads were open to me. Benito appeared at the door again, this time with a bulky canvas bag in his hands. Hey, don't bring any books, Ro laughed, followed by the other boys. There are sandwiches and juice in the bag, Benito explained. My mom thought we might get hungry on the way. Very thoughtful of her, I said. Can we finally leave now? With those words, I climbed onto the bike seat and pedaled fiercely. The other boys followed, with Ro and Benito on the back. I bet you survive on sandwiches alone, muttered Ro, pushing hard on the pedals. Sorry, said Benito, trying to take up as little space as possible. We stopped at Ro's house and he went to get his brother's bike. You didn't even ask permission? I asked sarcastically. My brother's on the mainland now, working, so he probably won't need his bike anytime soon, Ro retorted, and I felt a pang of envy. I'd give anything to be away from home right now, away from these silly boys I had to deal with. We set off for the volcano, and of course, I was leading the procession. No one could not only overtake me, but couldn't even keep up with me on the fast bike. I felt power and independence, something I had always sought. The wind ruffled my hair fiercely, the sky suddenly clouded over, but I paid no attention. I pedaled along the dusty road without bothering to avoid the small stones, feeling as if wings were growing on my back. The boys followed me in a group, and Benito, on Ro's bike, fell further and further behind. He wasn't used to physical activity, and the road to the volcano was unknown to him. Ro kept stopping to wait for the clumsy runner. Of course, he wasn't worried about Morales, but about his brother's bike. Finally, we reached the ruined city. The clouds had completely taken over the sky. It looked like it was going to rain. Not the best weather for digging, Ro muttered gloomily. But I didn't care. I got what I wanted. I outdid all the boys and was the first to reach the city. The search for treasure didn't interest me in the slightest, but Benito was beaming with surprise and delight. He had never been to the town near the volcano before, and his exploratory mind craved new experiences. The children scattered lazily in different directions. I climbed onto a partially destroyed wall, leaning my bike against it, and sat there, swinging my legs and thinking. Ro followed Morales closely, who was anxiously examining his surroundings, inspecting every speck of dust and crack in the stone. Ro quickly tired of this and, looking up at the gloomy sky, decided it was time to put his plan into action. Hey, Morales, called out the boy. Morales looked at him thoughtfully. Did you know there's a bell tower up ahead? Apparently there are pigeons there, all white, without a single spot. I swear. Really? Benito asked, his eyes shining with joy and amazement. Let's see. Of course, Ro nodded. I'll call everyone. Turning around, he gave a piercing whistle. Hey, come here, let's go to the bell tower, he shouted, and his voice echoed anxiously in the empty, abandoned houses. I woke up from my daydreams and looked at Ro with concern. Was he really going to do what he had whispered in my ear before we left? Could he do it? I climbed off the wall into the dust and approached the boys. Let's have a snack first, I suggested excitedly. We've waited so long for Morales for a reason. The boys nodded in agreement. Only Ro grumbled in dissatisfaction, but didn't argue with me. Benito brought out the bag of sandwiches and juice, and we began to munch on them. Your mother cooks well, approved one of the boys. You haven't tried her pancakes yet, Benito replied innocently. Ro giggled. I heard thunder echoing from somewhere near the volcano. I hope it doesn't erupt now, Benito joked, his mouth full. No one laughed. Finally, we finished our sandwiches, and Ro led Morales to the bell tower. The others followed, with me now trailing behind. My stomach tightened with nervousness. I tried to reassure myself, thinking that Ro was only joking and that I really didn't care about the fate of Benito, but it didn't help much. Suddenly, Ro began to tell a terrifying story about the ghost of a hermit monk who inhabited the bell tower. And with the weather getting worse, his words sounded scarier than ever. A large drop of rain fell on my forehead. Ro, we should go back, I said anxiously, but it seemed impossible to stop him. Let's just show the white pigeons to Benito and we'll go back, Ro replied. This apparently innocent remark triggered another spasm in my stomach. However, Morales seemed oblivious. He was very impressed by everything around him. The bell tower loomed in the distance against the darkening sky, its elongated silhouette inspiring a terrible fear in me. As we approached, Ro impatiently pushed Benito towards the tall door, miraculously almost untouched. "Go ahead," he said, and Morales, without suspecting a thing, pulled the door open. It creaked open, and the boy peered inside. The smell of old dust and something ancient and unfathomable filled the air. Ro sneezed. "It's dark in there," Benito muttered, shivering. "Take this," Ro replied, handing him a flashlight. The boy took the flashlight hesitantly, still unsure whether to go in. "Come on, hurry!" Ro couldn't wait and pushed Benito on the shoulder. "Don't be a coward!" Benito ran inside, and in the same second, Ro slammed the door and leaned on it. "Quick, get the stones!" he exclaimed. Benito tried to open the door from the inside, and when he failed, he slammed it as hard as he could. "Open up! I want to get out!" I heard his muffled voice, but the boys were busy carrying stones to block the door. With his arms crossed, Ro watched the process with satisfaction. "Hey, Ro, are you serious?" I snapped at him, overcoming another spasm. "Are you really going to leave him here all night?" "Let him meet the monk," Ro laughed. "I think you'll get along." The other boys laughed enthusiastically. "Do they have brains of their own?" I thought angrily, grabbing Ro's arm. "You can't do that," I protested. "Who says?" Ro frowned, pulling his arm away. "But hitting me over the head with a book is okay?" The boys continued to carry stones. Soon, a wall of stones grew up in front of the door. Benito's muffled cries and pleas didn't cease for a moment. The sky was completely dark. It was time to go back, but how could I leave him there? "We're done," said one of the boys, wiping his hands. "Good," Ro muttered. "Now let's go." He started to leave, but I blocked his path. "You're not leaving him here," I said firmly. "Who's going to stop me?" he challenged. "Me," I replied, facing him fearlessly. "I never feared anyone." "You're just a girl," he said, pushing me away rudely. "I don't care." "I'm not going with you," I replied, irritated. "As you wish," Ro replied indifferently. When the boys were out of sight, I cursed. "What bad luck to get involved with those idiots." I examined the stone wall. Benito had stopped knocking on the door. Maybe forget it, I thought. It's not worth taking a chance in the dark. I made a sensible decision and turned to leave, but I heard Benito's cry again. I stopped and looked at the stone wall once more. "Yes, those jackals did a good job," I observed sarcastically. Sighing, I moved closer. "Hey, Benito, stop crying," I shouted, grabbing the stone at the top. "I'm going to get you out of here." But saying it was easier than doing it. For the next hour, I struggled immensely to move the rocks. Moving the rocks was difficult, but I was used to difficulties. Nobody raised me like a princess. As it got completely dark, I started groping for the stones. Benito remained silent, and I became anxious. Has he lost consciousness out of fear, I thought, or has he seen the ghost? "Hey, Morales, are you alive in there?" I called out, shivering. "Alive," replied the boy. "Have you seen the monk?" "Not yet." I let out a sigh and continued removing the stones. To make the darkness less frightening, I started humming a silly song I'd heard on the radio in the morning. Finally, I removed the last stone and opened the door. A beam of light hit my face, and I narrowed my eyes, covering them with my hand. "Sorry," Benito whispered, lowering the flashlight. "Quickly, get out," I ordered. He didn't hesitate. We ran to where I'd left my bike. "I hope they haven't done anything to it," I said anxiously. Benito held my hand, shining his flashlight on the road. "I'm so grateful to you," he said softly. "It's too early to say thank you," I replied. "We're a long way from home." Fortunately, the bike was where I'd left it, but there was a big scratch on the frame. "Damn it," I cursed, unexpectedly crying. I felt deeply hurt by my bike and by myself. And I thought of my father, who had certainly spent a lot of time choosing a present for his youngest daughter. Benito inspected the scratch. "They did that with a sharp stone. I'm sorry." I snorted a few times, then wiped away the tears. "You get on the back and I'll pedal," I announced. But Bonito disagreed. "You're a girl," he argued. "Let me pedal." I looked at him skeptically. I was about to say that he wouldn't be strong enough, but at that moment we heard the sound of an engine on the road. The engine switched off, and we heard car doors slamming and excited voices. Several people approached with flashlights. "Francisca!" I recognized my father's voice. "Beautiful!" his mother shouted. I almost went mad with joy. "We're here!" I shouted with all my might. And a moment later, I found myself in my father's strong arms. It was only then that I realized how scared I had been, and tears welled up in my eyes. "What's wrong, sweetheart? I'm here," said my father lovingly. "They scraped the bike," I lamented. "Tomorrow you'll show me who did it," my father declared fiercely. "Don't worry about the bike, we'll repaint it." Roe and his gang were severely reprimanded by their parents when they heard about the incident. The bike was repainted almost like new, only a little darker, more cherry than red. I liked the new color, but I still felt a lingering discomfort. I never spoke to Roe again, or even said hello. 3 years later, he finished school and left the island. 5 years later, I finally left too. The new life left no room or time for reminiscences. Benito Morales and the story of the abandoned bell tower seemed to be permanently erased from my memory. Now, the boy I had saved more than 10 years ago was reappearing on my path, and how he had changed. As promised, I dialed his number as soon as I left the restaurant. "Francisca, my dear, how nice to hear from you again. Thank you for calling." We arranged to meet in the park. While the children played in the playground, we sat on a bench drinking coffee and reminiscing about childhood. "I was almost scared out of my mind back then," Bonito confessed, remembering the bell tower. "I'm very grateful to you for not abandoning me." "Oh yes," I laughed. "Those stones haunted me for a long time afterwards." "For me, it was the ghost of the hermit monk," Bonito confessed. We were silent for a moment. "You have wonderful children," said Morales with a sigh. "I never got married. I went to university, did research, delved into science, defended my dissertation. Then I started a business, and as far as I can see, I've been successful," he smiled. Bonito just nodded modestly. "Money gives me the freedom I need to do what I love," he said. "True," I agreed. "Now I'm more into investments, traveling the world, learning new things. I came here by chance at the invitation of an old friend. He was my classmate, as quiet as me. You probably wouldn't recognize him now," I admitted. Bonito gave me a quick glance in which I noticed admiration. "Of course, you were different, so brave." "I'd say fearless. I always admired your courage and frankness. I dreamed of being like that." "It seems my audacity hasn't helped me much in life," I said bitterly, then laughed. "Now I prefer intelligence." "Do you regret anything in life?" asked Bonito cautiously. I thought for a moment. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't have rushed into marriage. I would have finished university and got a good job. Unfortunately, no one instilled that idea in me before. But it's never too late to start again, right? Bonito smiled. When you have 3 children to look after, everything becomes significantly more complicated. He nodded, understanding. "Do you like your job?" he asked. I laughed. "It's not that serving hungry customers is my passion," I admitted with a laugh. "But in my situation, I couldn't find anything better. After all, I'm responsible for my naughty little ones." Morales looked at me intently, as if he wanted to say something, but hesitated. He hasn't changed at all, still shy, I thought, noticing a slight edge to his eyes. "Do you think glasses are no longer fashionable?" I asked, smiling. Bonito was embarrassed. "I always wear glasses at home," he confessed. "Good old Bonito," I laughed warmly. The children ran up to us, crying out that they were hungry. "Sorry, Bonito, we have to go," I said, getting up. "It was good to see you again and thank you for the money. It will be very useful." With those words, I wanted to leave, but Bonito held my hand. "Listen," he said, looking at me with embarrassment. "Once you helped me, now I want to do something for you." Surprised, I didn't know what to say. Bonito stood up too, still holding my hand. The children tugged impatiently at my skirt, but I paid no attention, feeling the importance of the moment. "I want to help you with your work," said Morales firmly. "I'm sure you deserve a better life. Let me do that for you." I felt tears fill my eyes. I was so used to taking care of others that I had completely forgotten what it was like when someone took an interest in my life, when I mattered to someone. "Oh, Bonito, that's really not necessary," I stammered, feeling nervous. "But I feel it's necessary. I can see the tiredness in your eyes. It shouldn't be like this. I want to see you like the old Francisca, radiant and full of energy." I never thought something like this could happen in my real life. "I'm so grateful, Bonito," I said, touched, "for your words and your offer. But you know I don't have a good education." "What else did you do?" asked Bonito. I looked thoughtfully at the horizon. Memories of my previous life surfaced. I rarely allowed myself to do that, but now I couldn't hold back. I worked in an art gallery. I organized meetings with masters, had many conversations with interesting people. Morales listened attentively. "You know, Francisca, I really need someone like you. I'm planning a series of presentations around the world, and I'm looking for an assistant who can negotiate with cultural venues. I'm too shy to deal with these matters on my own." He smiled shyly at me. My heart overflowed with joy. "Mom, when are we going to eat?" my youngest son shouted impatiently. A feeling of gloom crossed my face. "What about my children? I can't leave them for long." "It won't be for long, a few days for each trip. I'll pay for a babysitter separately." Overloaded with emotions, I couldn't help but hug Morales. "I'm so happy, thank you, Bonito." He nodded, his eyes shining with youthful enthusiasm. "Now go, or your hungry children will destroy the whole park," said Bonito, and we both laughed.